Let's pass now at another major issue in Europe. Let's speak about the Brexit.
Right.
There are 4 months after Prime Minister David Cameron was re-elected with promises to reform Britain's relationship with the EU before a referendum by late 2017. Do you think that Europe has given the proper attention on the matter?
Yes, I do. I mean, they haven't given a lot of attention to the matter for 2 good reasons. The first reason is the Greek problem, which of course has occupied them for most of the early part of the summer, and then the refugee crisis, which is preoccupying them since the middle of the summer until now. So the Britain question has been squeezed off the agenda a bit, but that's also partly because David Cameron hasn't wanted to tell his European partners exactly what New Deal he's looking for. And until he actually explains what the deal is that he's looking for, they can't really have very detailed talks with him. Now we're expecting to see his wish list sometime in November. So I expect that in the next few weeks we will get down to more serious negotiations.
Mm-hmm. Prime Minister Cameron says he does not want the Brexit, which will take the Union to its core. But we have seen that in his party, Conservative Party, the views are divided. Do we have a clear image?
No, the Conservative Party is completely divided on this issue. Cameron, as you say, doesn't want Brexit, but he's left open the possibility that he might advocate Brexit if he can't get the sort of reform of Britain's relationship with the EU that he's looking for. Most people, though, think that he has no real desire for that. And ultimately, it's going to go down to the vote of the British people. On the one side, you'll have probably Cameron saying stay in. On the other side, you'll have many of his other Conservatives saying we should come out. Then you've got the UK Independence Party, which is a Eurosceptic nationalist party, saying that we should come out. You will have the Labour Party, probably most of them saying we should stay in, but some of them saying we should stay out. So it's going to be fairly evenly balanced as things stand. I mean, the smart money still thinks that the British people will vote to stay in, because when they actually look at the prospects of coming out, they won't want to face the uncertainty of an exit and what that would mean for our trading relationship with the EU, which is responsible for almost half of our entire trade. But on the other hand, there are many British people who are very exercised about immigration. We have a huge amount of immigration, not, it should be said, many refugees. The refugees from Syria who are coming into Greece, they're not heading to Britain. They are, heading to Germany if they can get to Germany. But it's very, very difficult for them to get to Britain, because to get to Britain, they've got to get all the way across Europe, and then they've got to cross the English Channel. So this is one of the ways in which being an island is actually quite beneficial. And they're not going to cross the English Channel on these ghastly cheap dinghies that the people smugglers are using to take people from Izmir to Chios and your islands. I mean, but although refugees, we don't have many refugees coming to the UK, we do have a lot of immigrants, a lot of people from other EU countries. I mean, indeed, from Greece, we have, as the British economy has been performing quite well in recent years, but other Eurozone economies haven't been performing well. A lot of people have decided they want to come to Britain because that's where the jobs are. And in my view, we are benefiting hugely from this influx of people. Of course, it creates certain difficulties. Do we have enough homes, etc., etc.? But although my view is that we are benefiting from this, a lot of the British people are quite skeptical of it, and they're sort of saying, oh, what are we doing? Are these people taking our jobs? Are they driving down our salaries? Are they taking our homes, etc., etc.? And this is being used by the anti-Europeans within the UK as a very strong reason to say why we should come out of the EU, because then the idea is we'll pull up the drawbridge and we won't let these foreigners in.
Have you considered the consequences, or British people have considered the consequences of a Brexit? Why many EU officials think such scenario as catastrophic, even more damaging than a Brexit? Do you consider that it's possible?
I think that a Brexit would probably be more damaging for the EU than a Grexit would have been. Yes, I think that probably is true because, well, Britain is, it's 6 times the population of Greece. It's something like 10 times the economic size of Greece. It's got the most powerful army in Europe, along with France. It has a seat on the UN Security Council, permanent veto power on the UN Security Council. So it has quite a lot, and if it left, this would be a big blow to the EU. But of course, it's not the EU that's voting, it's the British people who have to vote. And they have to look at the damage to them if they leave. And my view is that we would be damaged. I don't think it would be catastrophic. So actually, if I compare it with Greece, I think a Grexit would have been extremely damaging for the Greek people, whereas I think Brexit would be damaging but not catastrophic for the British people. I think that, it would damage us economically. We wouldn't have such good access to the EU market, which is half of our trade. It would be damaging our influence in the world. Although we are, a moderately powerful country, it's not like the old days of the British Empire, and, there wasn't a part of the world that wasn't painted red, as they used to say. We are only 1% of the global population, 3% of global GDP. Actually, that's quite an interesting figure. Our percentage of global GDP is about the same as Greece's percentage of the Eurozone's GDP. And so we won't have that much influence if we are on our own. We can have some influence, but increasingly problems are cross-border problems, whether it's terrorism or cross-border crime or global warming or things like Ebola, or whether we're dealing with Vladimir Putin flexing his muscles in the Ukraine, or we're looking at what's going on in Syria. These are all global, or if not global, cross-border problems. And we in the UK will have very limited capacity to influence these situations to our advantage if we are acting on our own. It's only by being part of the club with our other European allies and working with them, and we do need to work more effectively, because it's not as though the EU is being very effective in these particular topics, but at least they have a chance of being more effective than if we split off and be on our own. So I would say that's the second reason that we would suffer. And then the third reason, which I don't know if many people in Greece have focused on, but is if Britain leaves the EU, there is a high risk that Scotland will leave the UK, because we had a referendum. The Scots had a referendum last year on whether they wanted independence, and they decided narrowly that they preferred to stay within the UK. However, all the opinion polls show that the Scots are more pro-EU than the English. And if Britain votes to leave the EU, the Scottish National Party, which is the dominant party in Scotland and which wants independence, has already said that then there will have to be a second referendum to ask the Scots whether they want to leave the UK, because that will be the only way that they can get back into the EU. Now, if that happened, what the UK would lose, okay, it would only be 10% roughly of its population, but it would be about 40% of the landmass we'd lose. And this is a union between Scotland and England, which has been lasted for 300 years. This would be a huge blow to national pride.
Yeah.
We would move, people are saying we would move from being Great Britain to Little England.
Yeah, that's correct. At the moment, many pollsters claim that the public opinion is warming to the idea of Brexit. At the moment, which position prevails over the other, at the British people?
I mean, the opinion polls show different things, but I think on balance, the average of them is slightly in favor of staying in. But it's not a big difference either way. The most positive reason to think that we will stay in is that when David Cameron starts to campaign for us to stay in, assuming that he does campaign for us to stay in, this may swing a large proportion of the population. That's the most positive reason. The most negative reason for thinking we might come out, well, there are two. One is the refugee crisis that I was talking about, and the more that goes on, the more there's a risk that the British people will say, oh my God, we should leave because there's this vast horde of refugees crossing Europe, even though hardly any of them are actually coming to the UK. But still, be that as it may, that's the argument. And then the second, I think, the concern is that within the British population, although it's fairly evenly balanced, those who want to leave the EU, the anti-Europeans, are much more passionate about wanting to go than the pro-Europeans are about wanting to stay in. And so as the campaign gathers pace, there may be more enthusiasm on the outside than on the inside, and that could tip the balance when the vote comes.